This meeting is being recorded.
Welcome to Never Again is Now, a podcast about anti-Semitism. I am Evelyn Marcus, and in addition to being a psychologist, I am featured in the documentary about anti-Semitism, Never Again is Now. I am a Dutch Jew and a daughter of Holocaust survivors. In 2006, I immigrated to the United States because of the rising anti-Semitism in Europe.
I am Phyllis Zimbler-Miller. I'm the founder of the free nonfiction Holocaust theater project, thinedgeofthewedge.com. I grew up in Elgin, Illinois, in a town in which the Jews had come at the turn of the previous century to escape the Tsar and other pogroms. The Holocaust was not really a part of our growing up. And yet, 25 years after the end of World War II, my husband and I were stationed with the US Army in Munich, Germany, and this changed our lives forever.
Danielle Greyman is a UK resident who, as a Leeds University senior, experienced blatant anti-Semitism targeting her academic work. There is now a lawsuit against Leeds University for this anti-Semitic occurrence. Danielle, welcome to our show. Awesome that you wanted to come on and tell us about and share your story with us and with our listeners. So could you please describe your background and what your main course of study was at Leeds University in England? And for which course did you write the so-called failed paper?
So I grew up in London, and when it came time to choose a university, I chose the University of Leeds because it had a very big Jewish community. And I did a BA in sociology. And in my final year of the degree, I elected a module called State Crime and Immorality, which is where the incident took place.
Could you just tell us what it means, state government and morality?
State Crime and Immorality is the name of a module.
Right.
State Crime and Immorality. And it wasn't just states, it went into the crimes of the powerful, like Murdoch. It was a fairly new module designed to basically encourage us to do a mini dissertation without the research, so more secondary sourcing. Like the module was graded based on a 5,000 word case study where we were allowed to choose our own topics.
Thank you for explaining that. Then go on. I didn't really mean to interrupt you, but I thought our listeners might need a little bit more background.
And for which course did you write the failed paper?
This was as part of my sociology course. We were allowed to take optional modules. This was an optional module that was still under the School of Sociology and Social Policy.
Sociology, social policy.
Yeah.
Okay. Phyllis.
And you chose your paper then was, tell us about your paper.
I wrote a case study on state crime and immorality. I wrote about Hamas crimes against Palestinians with the aid of the United Nations. And I was really motivated because the lecturers had told us that the more unique the topic and the more controversial the topic, the more likely they were to publish our assignments. So I thought I had a really unique take on an issue where I felt like there was a real lack of literature. Without going into politics, if you Google Palestine, the first thing that comes up is Israel-Palestine, not like the internal politics and dynamics going on within the region. And so I felt like I had found a really strong topic. And I got approval.
That's what I was going to say. And so we don't, in England, do you have to get approval for your topic? So you did get approval.
I got approval from 2 of the lecturers and was even advised not to even mention Israel, which is one of the reasons I was failed. And one of the grounds for our appeals is I was either incorrectly advised or the marker was incorrect. But I did receive approval.
Including, this is very important, not to mention Israel.
Yeah.
And so then what happened? You wrote your paper. Tell us then what happened next.
My feedback was late and I actually emailed the lecturer, like, when is the assignment grade coming out? I really want to know, like, the feedback, this is my last assignment at this university, and I want to know what grade I'm finishing with. And my email went unreplied to. 3 days later, the grades were published, and I was given a failing grade of 35. And I have never failed an essay before. So I was in just complete shock. I couldn't even read the feedback. I had my rabbi's wife read it to me. Um, it was like a big blow. I didn't understand how it could happen.
But tell us what the feedback said.
So the feedback, there were parts where it was procedural irregularity and parts with just outright bias. So the procedural irregularity was that I was marked down on word count for not writing 5,500 words because you're allowed 10% over, which is not grounds to mark someone down. I was also given a fair few comments within the essay that I deemed and many others deemed inappropriate, including making fun of 7 counts of antisemitism. I made a point that there's an ideological investment in future war, which could cause harm to Palestinian civilians. And I used the example of the 7 instances of antisemitism found by UN Watch in UNRWA schools. So anti-Semitic ideology is being taught to children. And the marker wrote an in-text comment saying this hardly showed an epidemic of anti-Semitism. I also wrote about the use of human shields, and the marker felt it was necessary to draw attention to where the rockets were coming from and try to divert blame, which wasn't within the scope of my assignment. In my introduction, I really outlined there's this entire discourse on Israel Palestine. That's not the topic of this assignment. There's a real lack of literature discussing just Palestinian society, and that's what I'm going to focus on. So the boundaries of the assignment were made abundantly clear, but Israel was referenced in the majority of in-text comments. So there was one point where I spoke about the number of Palestinian children that had died as a result of the use of human shields, firing rockets from schools. And the comment was, what about Israel killing them? So it was very emotional, the feedback was very emotive. It wasn't coming from a professional or academic standpoint.
So what did you do next?
I cried. I contacted my Chabad, my local Chabad. I had my Chabad rabbi family read the feedback and talk to me. And my Chabad, their parent is a lecturer in America, so she said she would send it to them, and they came back and said, "There's no way the essay is a fail. I can't give you more intense feedback, but you should have more people mark it." And eventually this got to United Kingdom Lawyers for Israel, who arranged for David Hirsch and a few other lecturers at other universities to mark it. And they all came back and said, there's no way this is a fail. And the feedback is really inappropriate. We would never expect this kind of feedback. It's emotional, not academic. So then it went from there, and then there was an entire appeals procedure. After a fair amount of research into the marker, which
So Danielle, a school, a university, a college, a teacher, a professor should grade you on your scientific skills, right? Not on the content or opinion you're voicing, right?
Yeah.
It's all about the quality of your argumentation, the quality of your sources, right? That's what they should grade you on. But in this case, that wasn't the thing, or maybe not the only thing they graded you on, as they should have. They graded you on certain information that they didn't want to hear.
And
right?
beyond that, while I had to seek approval, the marker was meant to be marking my essay anonymously. And it had been a marker that I'd had no interaction with my entire time at university. I'd never met her, I'd never studied under her. And yet, when I decided to do some research on the person who had marked my essay, I found that she had blocked me on Twitter, which is a very open source to my identity. It clearly says that I'm Jewish and I'm a Zionist. So that kind of tipped me off, and it felt like bad faith. I feel like if I had a different identity and I wrote this essay, it would have been taken in a different way. So I feel like it wasn't even just marked on a differing opinion, but purely you can't be trusted to write about this topic because of who you are. And I think that's where the argumentative comments really came from.
Right. So it was actually discrimination
Yeah.
of you as a person, of who you are, right?
And when I went and researched her Twitter, there were a number of really damaging tweets in support of Hamas,
Right.
in just blatant anti-Semitism, and condemning Israel for things that have been long ago disproved.
Wow.
So it really was a cesspit of anti-Semitism. And during the appeals procedure, we submitted an entire 20-page report showing these screenshots of these tweets, and the appeals committee came back and said, while the marking was unfair and we don't understand where the grade came from, we see no evidence of bias. So it was a big cover up, and a lot of lecturers tried to cover for her. This is all while the University of Leeds has the IHRA as part of their policy. So it's starting to see.
So they adopted the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, which includes anti-Zionism as anti-Semitism, and yet they don't enforce it. Actually, the opposite.
I want to be clear, I don't feel like the IHRA bans anti-Zionism, but it does ban blaming Jews or Israel for things that are done by others. For example, if Hamas are using human shields and putting lives at risk, how is it Israel's fault when they're, may or may not be defending themselves depending on what argument you take. So it breached it on multiple fronts, and the university have this policy adopted, but they haven't practiced it at all.
Yes, and I would argue that it also includes anti-Zionism, because it says the denial of the right of the Jewish state to exist is also included in the definition as anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism. So, but okay.
Okay, yeah, let me ask the question to go farther back. While you were at Leeds, you said that there was a big Jewish community. I wasn't sure you met at the school or in the city. Did you feel anti-Semitism as a palpable presence on the campus?
It was intense, and I really retreated into my community. The university has a large number of Jewish students, but it's like an enclave. We keep to ourselves because the second we step out, we experience something, we go running back. I remember, is it okay if I say?
Absolutely.
I joined a society in my freshers week, and I went to that society once because after attending the debate, we went to the pub for a drink, and someone tried to argue with me that Holocaust denial wasn't anti-Semitic, and then accused me of classism because I tried to say there's a difference between a person in power like promoting Holocaust denial and some random Tom, Dick, and Harry in a pub that just says dumb stuff. So there was really a culture of like gaslighting in the student body. And I had a number of inappropriate comments from staff from the sociology department specifically, but the culture of anti-Semitism was ingrained in the student population. It really was everywhere.
You know, I just want to say that you mentioned David Hirsch, and Evelyn and I have interviewed him. He's the head of the Center for the Study of Contemporary Anti-Semitism at the University of London. And he also talked about this anti-Semitism in sociology, which I don't think we have time now to talk about, but it just blows my mind, if you know that American expression.
We created the field, and now it's like we're being kicked out of it.
Yes,
you
you
know,
talked about that.
yeah, but
So,
it is sad.
so I just, every time I hear it, okay. Uh, I just want to know then explain the appeals process, explain how you couldn't, as I understand it, go on to your master's that you've been conditionally accepted at Glasgow University. Tell us a little bit more about the personal and the timeline and the steps of this appeal.
So the appeal actually took a year, even though it was meant to take a couple months. We were waiting, and of course, COVID was used as a response when it was like brought attention to. Um, but we submitted a report from David Harsh on both the quality of my essay and the marker, along with the collection of tweets. And we appealed under procedural irregularity and discrimination. We argued the discrimination was what motivated the procedural irregularity. It took a really long time to have my appeals committee hearing, like a year, which during that time I hadn't graduated. The appeals committee, it was advised, would be around half an hour to 2 hours that I would be speaking with them, and they were done with me in 10 minutes. So I waited a really long time for something that was more of a virtue signal than anything else. Um, and they were really reluctant to acknowledge what might cause an experienced lecturer who is very well acquainted with the mark scheme and now is in charge of that module to create this procedural irregularity. Um, I had asked the university multiple times through multiple ways if I could graduate, because I had enough that I would finish with a strong grade, even with this failed essay. And I could not get a clear answer. I emailed the School of Sociology. I spoke to the student services. I emailed lecturers directly, all trying to ask whether I could get my degree certificate to attend, and there was no response. And eventually, the university sent me my certificate because they realized my grade wouldn't change either way. But it took a really long time to negotiate that. And by that point, the option to go do a master's in Glasgow was no longer available, which was really sad. I had like already found accommodation and I was really invested in a career in sociology. But in hindsight, it's probably for the best that I didn't put any more time and money into the field. But it took a ridiculously long time, and I feel like they were waiting me out. The university policy means that I can't submit a complaint about staff members during an appeal process. So it meant that I was unable to continue my claim against the lecturer.
So now that you have your certificate, two things. What are you planning to do? And then what can we learn from this? I mean, you were incredibly brave. And I just as an American don't understand why there wasn't some higher authority that could come to the university and embarrass the university so much that they would do something. Just don't understand.
My case was referenced in Parliament, but there's a real separation between the state and what universities can do. They're private institutions. So there's attempts at cracking down on it because it's a real trend that students are bullied into conforming to certain ideologies. Um, but it's one of those things that's just too difficult to tackle. The vice chancellor of the university also looked at my case and had every opportunity to step in and elected not to. In terms of what I'm doing now, I'm desperately trying to find a new passion, um, and really failing in it. It's very hard to find something new to love. I'd studied sociology for 8 years. I'd studied it since I was 14. I was heavily invested in doing a PhD, becoming a sociologist. And I put a lot of work in, I put a lot of time and money. And ultimately, sociology isn't seen as prestigious a degree as some of the other choices, even though it's very similar to, say, politics. which means that my options are fewer. I'm looking to try and find something else I love, but it's like mourning the loss of something.
Since we
Wow.
have a listeners right now, if you could wave a magic wand, how did you plan on using it? What is it that you wanted to do with sociology that maybe can be segued into something? Maybe some listener will get an idea. You can contact us and through our website, and we can connect you with Danielle. Go ahead.
I wrote my dissertation on Western chauvinism and the victim savior dichotomy in far right groups. And I eventually wanted to build a career studying the far right and anti-Semitism and the growth in male far right groups like the Proud Boys or incels. And that was something I was really motivated to do. And sadly, that's not super transferable. That was a big focus of mine. I was a victim of a hate crime in Leeds that went viral 2 years before this happened, and it kind of inspired my career in that path. Some guy at the pub basically told me I should have been gassed, and I caught it on camera, and it was a big deal. And I appeared on neo-Nazi websites and blogs alike. So I was really motivated to kind of not just condemn it, but study it, try and find out what is the driving force behind this recruitment. Why is there this new brand of far right that refuses to acknowledge racism? Like for my dissertation, I wrote specifically about the Proud Boys, and they use the term Western chauvinism, not white chauvinism. And they recite the line 14, which is it used to say protect the future for our white children, and now it says protect the future for our Western children. And I was really like interested in how that translated into everyday politics. And now I have to figure out if there's anything else I can do with that. But that was my ultimate goal.
Wow.
Evelyn, do you want to ask? I know we've kind of gotten off the spine, but this is so fascinating that other questions came up as we were talking about it. And we're not ready yet to ask you last questions, I don't think. Last comments. Evelyn, is there specific questions that you have been asked that you want to?
Yes. So you have experienced a hate crime coming from the far right. Somebody who said you should have been gassed, right?
Yes.
You're experiencing anti-Semitism in the sociology department in the university, coming from the left, I guess. Is that correct?
Initially left, yes.
Yeah. So how do you explain it as a sociology student, whether or not formally a student, but you study sociology since you're 13? How do you explain that? Do you have an explanation for anti-Semitism in the UK suddenly being expressed from the far right and from the far left? Did they marry each other? How do you explain this?
There is a theory called the horseshoe theory, which is the idea if you go far left or far right enough, the politics and ideologies aren't that different.
What is the name?
The horseshoe theory.
Oh, the horseshoe. Okay.
And I feel like that theory explains most of my life away. It's a really valid, I wouldn't even call it a theory at this point. I think it's very much based in fact at this point. And I think...
Could you explain that to us, that theory?
So the idea is the far right, the far left, it's a horseshoe, it comes back round. So the ideologies meet here and they're very similar. And you can see that with new groups. There's, I don't know if you've heard of cottagecore. It's like a very Gen Z thing. But it's called cottagecore.
Cottagecore?
Yeah.
Okay. Just trying Okay.
It's like a naturalist group that's like very into veganism and environmentalism, and it's descended into white supremacy. Even though it's like environmentalism, it's traditionally something that, you know, you would define yourself as far left. If you look at the big environmental organizations, they want to consider themselves left wing. But because you go far left enough, it comes back around. So you have the same ideology on the right and on the left. Um, it's you have like socialism, the Socialist Party in Germany ended up having really right-wing ideas, even though it was a socialist party, which we'd think of as left. So you come back around and you have the same ideology across the political scale. Um, and I think the reason for that is there's always something to blame the Jews for. There's the old joke, the left blame the Jews for capitalism and the right blame the Jews for communism. And this is the united force. There really is always a reason to blame Jews for something because it's such a convenient scapegoat. You know, the powerful elite that are somehow also genetically inferior. You know, there's so many conflicting stereotypes that you can subscribe to whatever is most convenient for you. And in England, I think it's particularly unique because England, from my experience, has never been a country that's really faced up to the past. Um, there was a year I lived at the University of York, and every day I would go past Clifford Tower. And it was a big monument. People would say,
Oh,
you go there for directions.
wait.
And
Let's tell our American audience and others. You're referring to the York Massacre, right? In year something
yeah,
or other.
yes.
What year is it? 10. Tell me this year. 10 something, 11. Okay.
1035? I have no idea.
In the Middle Ages.
In the Middle Ages. And does that one of us want to say a sentence about what it is, just for everyone who doesn't know about the York Massacre?
It's one of the many places they murdered Jewish residents.
Yes.
Um, this
but
is
it's a very well-known meaning, as opposed to the little massacres. I'm not trying to make fun. This is a major,
a very big massacre. They killed all the town's Jews. It was the biggest in England, if I'm correct.
And has that still influence on today?
Well, if you go there and somebody will say, oh yeah, you go past Clifford's Tower, but there's a complete disconnect between what that place is. They have these historical monuments and this history that's completely disconnected from our understanding of society. You know, I went to university with the best and brightest. I went to a Russell group, and there were people there that had never heard of the British Empire. And if you go to a pub in England and you ask about the British Empire, you'll get very dull responses. People don't really know what that was and what it consisted of. You know, it was the biggest empire. And so there's a real lack of history. And if you detach history from something, what you have is a bunch of whiny minorities that are disadvantaged for no real reason because you've not given an understanding to why that disadvantage exists. You know, there's a lot of places in England where there's been really horrendous attacks against Jews, and you ask anyone and they'll say, oh, I didn't know anti-Semitism was still a thing. I've heard that so many times from my friends, from my non-Jewish friends. They said, until we met you, we had no idea anti-Semitism still existed, because there's a complete disconnect. They'll go to these places and the history behind it is lost, which means the lessons behind it are just gone. And that's, I would say, the majority of Britain.
I think that's really important. Could you say that once more? And I'm looking online, anyone can look up quickly, York Massacre, but I can't find the year. Oh, 1190, sorry, 1190. One of the worst anti-Semitic massacres in the Middle Ages took place in York in 1190. I can read the next answer. But what I thought you just said was really important. Without knowing the history, they can't know the lessons. I think that's really important.
And so you have a majorly white, or not all white, but majorly white community see a bunch of other identities complaining about something. And they say, well, what are you complaining about? what is there to complain about? You just get on with life, you know? And even on some of the comments, thankfully, I've had mostly sympathetic comments on this, but there's people, well, what is suing the university going to do? It's done. Well, why did you write that essay? That wasn't a balanced essay without any knowledge on the assignment. You know, it's always, I just get on with life. There's no problems for me. Why is a problem happening for you? The problem must be you. There's nothing in society creating this problem. Otherwise, I would experience it.
Right. So they're blaming the victim mostly in
Yeah.
the reactions, and don't acknowledge that Jews experience discrimination in the country, and don't even know much about, or maybe anything about Jews, right?
Yeah, but not just Jews, it goes across every minority group. Like the very history of Britain is just completely separate from England. You could ask the average Brit and they would not be able to tell you about any of the atrocities. So because of that detachment, I would say British culture has a real lack of empathy with anybody suffering from anything.
Yeah.
That translates to Jewish people suffering.
And the Holocaust did not happen in the UK. I think that also makes a big difference.
I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with the island of Guernsey.
Yes,
No?
where the Jews were shipped off because they were
Yeah.
German, the ones that had managed to escape, right? Because they were German citizens.
And during the war, Guernsey was occupied by German forces, and Jews were used as slave labor there. So it happened on British soil. But again, I don't know how many Brits would be able to tell you that. Also, I know a lot of Jews, when they came to England, they were abused for being German, like you said.
Right.
And there was a real limit to the number of Jews that were allowed to enter England. But it goes, there's a rewrite. If you ask someone what caused World War II, they'll say, we saved the Jews. And I've had this before. Britain saved the Jews during World War II. This
Really?
was not the motivation. It was about land. It was about empire. It was a happy side effect. The Jews lived. You know, nobody was that bothered. You know, they had every opportunity to bomb the train tracks that led to the camps. They had knowledge of what was going on. You know, the fact that Jews lived was just another reason to be upset and a way to rewrite it so that England is some amazing victor and an icon of human rights, when in reality it had nothing to do with us. And so there's a disconnect again there.
I have a little different view on that. As a Jew from the Netherlands, I know Jews who survived by reaching the United Kingdom.
My family did.
The Dutch resistance operated big time from England. The RAF did a great job in liberating Europe. So I have a different emotion and focus with that. But I think I agree with you that the focus of England was not to save the Jews, but
The motivation of the war wasn't necessarily to save Jews. I'm not arguing that many Jews were saved because of British forces. You know, my family came to England because of that. So I'm not disputing that. England did help a lot of Jews, turned away a lot of Jews as well, but it wasn't the motivation to go to war. And that's kind of the story that's not told.
That I find that very interesting that anyone would say that's the motivation, because England for hundreds or thousands of years, motivation was to not let any other power become so strong that it threatened England. My husband taught me that. He's a World War II hobbyist. Is that the word? No, collection of World War II books. So I find it very strange that anyone in England would say that that was the motivation, that England didn't give up against Hitler.
I have a last question to you. Is there anything our listeners, wherever they are in the world, whatever age, or maybe a certain age, your age group, do you have a recommendation for them in helping to stop anti-Semitism and speaking up like you have spoken up?
I wish I could say everybody just get up, shout that you're Jewish and be proud, but the reality is it does come at a cost. And for me, that cost will be a career in sociology and the fact that I can't return to university on the student loan company dime. So I wish I could say, combat it wherever you find it, fight to your dying breath, we'll get through this. Anti-Semitism will eventually just be a thing of the past. But I don't think that's the case. So the only advice I can really offer is choose your battles wisely and think, is this something I'm willing to sacrifice? Do more research than I did into fields because I was too trusting in academia, which was a real personal flaw that cost me. Um, and honestly, make Aliyah if you want a peaceful life, or at least not have to deal with this on top of everything else.
Thank
Any
you.
other things you would like to add before we thank you and our listeners?
There are a number of wonderful organizations that will help you if you do choose to stand out. For me, UKLFI was a big support. They covered
Which state again?
United Kingdom Lawyers for Israel. It's a fantastic organization. They represent you and they cover the court costs for you, and they basically make the entire procedure tolerable, which is saying something. And they're really fantastic people doing really fantastic work. There's also a number of other organizations. There's Jewish on Campus, which is another really great one. So if you feel like something's not right and you want it looked into, maybe you wrote an essay like I did and you're gaslighting yourself. Is it a good essay? Wasn't it a good essay? Is this on me? Reach out. You're not without support. Your community is a huge source of strength, and reaching out to them will really help you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Danielle. This has been really a compelling and informative interview. We wish you the best of luck on your next steps. Thank you, listeners, for listening. For any of you who have not yet seen Evelyn's powerful documentary, Never Again Is Now, it's available on Amazon and YouTube. You can find out more about my nonfiction play at thinedgethewedge.com. And everyone, this is how we end each time, without putting yourself in physical harm or hopefully hurting your career, speak up against anti-Semitism. I'll hate whenever you can.